Greetings, friends. My name is Anna Nichenko, and now we will dive in the top news of this day. The restriction of Ukraine will begin already this year, and the US is actively supporting Kyiv on this path. This is how Prime Minister of Ukraine, Denys Shmyhal, commented on the results of the meeting with the US President's Deputy National Security Advisor on International Economic Affairs and co-chairman of the Coordination Platform of Donors of Ukraine, Mike Pyle.
The key issue of reconstruction were discussed. 5 priorities for rapid recovery for this year have already been determined: energy recovery, humanitarian demining, housing reconstruction, critical and social infrastructure, private sector development. We need $14 billion for these directions this year. The United States has already announced the allocation of $1.5 billion to support the government's plan for the rapid recovery of Ukraine. I am convinced that the platform of donors, our financial Rammstein, will ensure effective coordination of efforts to restore and rebuild our country. Denys Shmyhal, Prime Minister of Ukraine, on Facebook.
I don't know what we will call the economic plan, financial Rammstein, the Marshall Plan for Ukraine, but it is clear that economic assistance is very necessary for our country, both now to support the economy and after the end of the war to rebuild all the destruction, which, according to the Office of the President of Ukraine, is already worth $700 billion. There are currently 4 sources of financing for reconstruction, Shmyhal said. We are talking about the funds of international partners, directly budget funds of Ukraine, funds of donors and the private sector, and most importantly, confiscated Russian funds in Ukraine and the world. This should be the main resource for rebuilding the country, according to Shmyhal, and I absolutely agree with him. Of course, we hope for US leadership in this. As for investments, the most promising are energy, the defense industrial complex, the agricultural sector, IT, the extraction of critical raw materials, the construction of new infrastructure and new housing. During his trip to the US, Shmyhal also had a successful conversation with representatives of the International Monetary Fund. Ukraine will get access to $115 billion of long-term support thanks to the International Monetary Fund and the G7 countries.
A year ago, the IMF office, we agreed on ways to financially support Ukraine. We talked about $5 million of monthly budget support. During this time, we have not only successfully passed a difficult financial year, but we now have a large program for the next 4 years in the amount of $15.6 billion. Thank you and appreciate this help. Denys Shmyhal, Prime Minister of Ukraine, on Facebook.
Nevertheless, now the most necessary help is military. It is not for nothing that Denys Shmyhal once again reminded at a meeting with U.S. Defense Minister Lloyd Austin that Ukraine needs F-15 and F-16 fighter jets and longer-range missiles from the U.S. We will win this war, but to achieve it faster and with less casualties, Ukraine still needs intensive military support.
Now, I'll continue to convene the Ukraine Defense Contact Group to coordinate support for Ukraine's urgent and long-term needs. And we'll continue to swiftly deliver security assistance through procurements and from our own stocks as well. We also remain committed to sustainment and to ensuring that your forces receive adequate spare parts and training for maintenance. At the same time, we will keep investing in our own defense industrial base to further ramp up production. So I'm confident that we will meet Ukraine's defense needs through this spring and beyond. And as the President has repeatedly made clear, we will stand by Ukraine for as long as it takes.
Russia must be defeated in Ukraine and our territorial integrity must be restored. That is the only guarantee for a lasting peace, and this will be the best guarantee for security of whole Europe and the whole world. And I once again thank the United States of America and the American people for their solidarity with Ukraine. Together we will win. Thank you so much.
Prime Minister Shmyhal and Pentagon Chief Lloyd Austin also discussed Ukraine's needs for a successful counteroffensive, which, according to Shmyhal, will begin in the summer. Let me remind you that before his trip to the USA, Shmyhal visited Canada, where he also enlisted the government's support in helping Ukraine, new sanctions against Russia, as well as cooperation in military and business activities. The USA is preparing sanctions against the anti-Russia of Hungarian Prime Minister Orban, writes The Guardian. According to the newspaper, Congress is developing a bill aimed at ex-officials and supporters of the Hungarian government, mainly associated with Orban's party. It has been in the works since last year and is likely to be submitted for consideration as early as May this year. I have only one phrase on this matter. Can it be faster? Because Hungarian Prime Minister Orban is already playing politics too much. Today he said that Ukraine is allegedly a financially non-existent country. According to him, when the USA and the European Union decide not to finance Ukraine, the war will end immediately. I'll just remind you that in December, Hungary was the only country against allocating money to Ukraine from the European Union. And do you know when they changed this decision? After Brussels promised almost $6 billion for Budapest. Because although the European Union is talking about reforms in Ukraine, they also want for reforms within the countries of the Union. And in Hungary, everything is very bad with this. At the end of November, the European Commission recommended freezing the payment to Hungary. Budapest had until November 19 to adopt 17 reforms in the field of the rule of law and the fight against corruption, which were agreed with the European Union back in the summer. But these reforms have not been completed. So it turns out that Ukraine is wrongly subsidized by the European Union and Hungary should be supported, or what? And you know, countries are like people. If they don't get money in one place, they find it in another.
Венгрия быть полностью солидарными.
And it was possible for Hungary to be in full solidarity with the sanctions regime, follow the general directive of Western and European. It's just that Orban is not interested, because he has his own game, and it is possible that there is a material interest of him and his party in the Russian Federation. I believe that Brussels and the EU need to go for serious reforms of their charter and choose a mechanism whereby a member who is disobedient and harmful to common policy will be deprived of the right to vote, and then a mechanism of complete exclusion will be developed.
Moreover, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban's decision this week to sign new energy deals with Russia threatens to prolong Moscow's war against Ukraine. Oleg Ustenko, chief advisor to President Volodymyr Zelensky, has warned. He argued Brussels to suspend funding to avoid sending European Union money to Moscow. Hungarian Foreign Minister Péter Szijjártó traveled to Moscow on Tuesday to sign an agreement with Russia's state-owned energy giant Gazprom, allowing Budapest to buy more natural gas from Putin if needed. Whether you like it or not, Russia and cooperation with Russia will remain decisive for Hungary's energy security, Szijjártó said. Hungary has also entered into agreements to continue purchasing cheap Russian pipeline oil and amend its contract for the construction of the nuclear power plant. Budapest already buys 4.5 billion cubic meters of gas per year from Russia under a long-term contract, about 80% of its total supply. Orban defends his close economic ties to the Kremlin, and Hungarian officials say cutting gas is a long-term goal.
очень зависит от Российской Федерации.
Hungary is very dependent on Russia for gas, nuclear energy and also oil. Therefore, if the Russian Federation blackmails Hungary by cutting off energy sources, this will hit Hungarian households hard, which are heated by 40% of the natural gas of the Russian Federation. The Hungarian and Russian governments are also bound by the fact that the Kremlin finances the campaign of the Hungarian government, in particular the election in this country. Putin has a very adventurous ally in the center of Europe, a member state of the EU, NATO and many other organizations, and Putin is using Viktor Orban.
However, Budapest's efforts to increase imports are a slap in the face for the rest of the European Union, as Hungary supports its industry at the expense of its allies, Ustenka argues. Budapest has also secured sweeping exemptions for Brussels' sanctions against Russian oil, including being allowed to refine this cheaper oil and export petroleum products to neighboring European Union countries, leading to accusations that it profits at the expense of its allies. Hungary is building a new nuclear power plant financed by a Russian loan and built by Russia's state-owned Rosatom. The United States on Wednesday imposed sanctions on the Hungarian-based International Investment Bank with ties to Russia, as well as on 3 people living in Hungary, marking a new level of decline in Budapest's relationship with Washington. The International Investment Bank is a shady Budapest-based institution with ties to the Russian state that Western officials fear could be used for Russian intelligence operations in Europe. Ukraine calls for the protection and return of Ukrainian children unlawfully deported to Russia. Russian occupation authorities continue to forcibly transfer and adopt Ukrainian children. Russia is carrying out the world's largest child abduction operation in modern history, under the guise of a humanitarian action to protect orphans and children abandoned in a war zone. Russian authorities detained and forcibly deported over 19,500 Ukrainian children from their homes in Ukraine to Russia. These actions included the deliberate separation of children from their parents and the abduction of children from orphanages before sending them to the Russian Federation. The forced adoption and deportation of Ukrainian children by Russia is a blatant breach of the Genocide Convention and the Geneva Conventions, and it is a component of a large campaign of ethnic cleansing.
Children undergo the so-called de-idealization. They are trying to brainwash them into breaking their Ukrainian identity. When children arrive at orphanages in the Russian Federation, they are assigned guardians from among the administration of these orphanages. The guardian must write a statement to the Migration Service of the Russian Federation on behalf of this child that this child renounced Ukrainian citizenship. These actions are regulated by the Putin's decree. That is, they planned this in order to take away Ukrainian citizenship from children. Of course, from an international point of view and from the point of view of national legislation in Ukraine, such actions are illegal, but the occupiers do it, from which we conclude that the actions of the occupiers are not aimed at saving children, not in order to save children from war, but in order to take them away, kill their Ukrainian identity, give them Russian citizenship and push them into Russian families. That is, it is one of the acts of ethnocide. This is the destruction of the Ukrainian nation, but non-military means. Pavlo Lysyansky, director of the Institute of Strategic Research and Security, in an interview with Ukrainian radio.
Russia violates the fundamental principles of child protection in times of war by issuing Russian passports to Ukrainian children and placing them up for adopting with Russian families. These actions cannot be justified by concerns about security or health. Russia keeps trying to use its position as a permanent member of the European Union Security Council to spread false information about the kidnapping of thousands of Ukrainian children and their illegal deportation. We are grateful to all partners countries that condemned Russia's attempt to portray its actions in Ukraine as compliant with international law and free of evidence of international crime. War criminals should not be given a European nation's platform to spread disinformation. Instead, they should report their actions to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. I just want to tell you about the news that was recently published in the Ukrainian Center for National Resistance. The Russians invented new ways to deport children from occupied territories of Donbass. They introduced forced medical examinations for children in order to have reasons for deporting Ukrainians. The Kremlin plans to spend almost 1.5 billion rubles on this program, which is carried out by Russian doctors. After examination, the vast majority of children are prescribed for so-called treatment on the Russian territory, which parents cannot refuse because then they are threatened with taking away parental rights. For example, since the beginning of the year, 75,000 children have been examined in the Donetsk region, and 39,000 of them have been taken to the Russian Federation as a result. In the Luhansk region, 94,000 were examined and 66,000 were diagnosed with pathology, after which they were deported. And we can only imagine what is happening on Russian territory. That concludes today's video. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for future videos. Goodbye.